Hello, my fellow sovereign nodes. Before we get started today, I wanted to make a quick mention about the one-on-one healing sessions that are being offered by members of the decentralized consciousness community. There are currently 7 of us that are offering these amazing sessions. I've done multiple with each member and have found that in each case, they have met me with their specific, unique talents exactly where I needed and what I needed help with. If this at all resonates with you, sparks your curiosity, check out bitcoin-consciousness.com/sessions and reach out to one of us. Thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Decentralized Consciousness Podcast. Today on the podcast, I'm speaking with Sama Katharo. Sama, it's been a while since you've done an interview. There's been a lot going on for you. And I'm really excited to be having a conversation on.
Yes, it would be nice to speak on this podcast. It's a little bit like a second home to me in the online space, this podcast.
Mm-hmm. So there was one particular subject that kind of inspired you to reach out to me. And that was the subject of Atlantis. And there have been a lot of voice memos, a lot of conversations, a lot of updates that you have sent me about various experiences that you've had, various insights. And let's just start with those. Maybe talk a little bit about some of those experiences to the extent that you feel drawn, and talk about some of the insights that you've gained.
Yes, like I would say that this has been an unfolding journey for a long time. But I feel that there are certain things we need to unpack before I start talking about my experiences in Atlantis, like how do I access this and things like this. So, because this is parallel lives we're talking about, and how do we get into experiencing parallel lives? It's probably different for everyone, but if I would just back up my journey here, I would say it has to do with opening the heart. So if we open the heart and if we heal the childhood traumas and we come into a lifestyle of accepting to feel everything that happens. So if we look at mainstream society, it's directed towards not feeling and just using the mental to guide themselves. But when we then open up to the emotions and allow ourselves to feel what's happening in our lives and what's happening in meditations, then we get access to these frequencies. Like each emotion is a frequency that stretches out into the multiverse. And if we simultaneously evolve our inner senses, we're able to experience inner visions and smells and touch and hearing and things like this, then each emotion is like a world where we can sort of step into an emotion and see what's happening there. Yeah, so these things are not so easy to explain, but I'm attempting to give a little bit of a background here. And then we have like parallel lives or past lives. And it's possible to sort of access this like with some kind of mental capacity or inner seeing. But from my experience, it is when we start opening to the emotions of these parallel realities, that's when we get the more data, more information, because we are feeling the emotions of that person in that time space coordinate. And you can just imagine yourself having the emotions about the government, you have the emotions about your friends, your loved ones, and your work or whatever, or your community. It's all stored in your emotions. So when we access the emotions of another body, then we get like quite full picture of what was happening there. So it's not just seeing like a story, like a film, like passively, but it's actually being inside the person and experiencing the emotions there. Does that make sense, Caleb?
There's so much that you've already covered there. So basically, the way that you're describing emotions is, like you and I right now, we are talking rationally. We're using language to form concepts, to tell stories, to use examples. But you're describing the emotion as being like a feeling that represents the entire story, the entire true story. And this is quite a powerful concept in our human bodies.
Yes, we could take an example of what we're doing in momentum meditations. We are doing this with this physical body in 2024. So we are activating the senses, inner and outer senses, and we are really becoming aware of how our body is feeling in this space, like in the room. So we are pinging our external environment towards ourselves. So we're like pinging out, that's a wall there, and my body here, wall there, my body here. And you get that sort of one life experience very intensely in these kind of embodied meditations. And this is sort of just the first step, because when you get that skill of centering yourself in a body and experiencing everything around you, and also what we do, we use the what I call the passive focus. This is so active focus is when we are centering ourselves, or we are activating some chakras, or we are activating something, and then we switch. Every now and then we switch to the passive focus, where we just completely surrender. We don't do anything, but just experience that present moment, or that frequency environment, as I like to call it. So we are always in a frequency environment with our physical body. And then when we then open the heart, and when we then connect to these parallel bodies, parallel experiences, we are so used to doing these exercises. So we are then pinging in that environment and pinging that body. And we are also then activating the senses there, activation and the emotions there. And that is what gives this full experience of that world, or of that body. So what we're doing in momentum meditations is basically priming or preparing ourselves for a multidimensional experience. By just first thing is just becoming aware of this body in 2024 and everything that is going on in that energy body. And then when we master that energy body, we are then able to handle more energy bodies. This is the case then with Atlantis, for example. So some of these parallel realities is, let me just say that I don't go there by rationally deciding. I don't use force. I don't often use active focuses to actually go to certain places and do things. I mostly use the active focuses to just center myself and becoming aware, because it's the passive focus that actually is allowing us to take in information and to just go with that flow of those realities. Because if we are actively focused, if we're chasing something, if we are trying to achieve something, we are not able to, it's like we're just blasting output, we're not giving space for the input. And if you don't have the input, you do not experience these realities. So they come to me with divine timing, divine logistics at the right moments. So that's also a point I wanted to make. I'll let you give some feedback here.
Yeah. Okay, so, and I'm glad that we're on the subject of flow and emotions, because I continue to want to explore the divine role that emotions play in the human experience. And I've never really heard it described this way, where an emotion is a feeling, emotion is it's like experiencing some aspect of reality in its truest form. But so many of us have been brought up, really the culture as a whole have been brought up, that the emotions are something that needs to be ignored, shoved away. And more and more there are things like certain therapies, there are like the law of attraction, for instance, which begins to try to explain the emotions and what they mean. But I think what, using these models, what's so exciting about it is it's a way for us to understand that we are able to move through and to all of these different frequency signatures at really any given point in time, because they're timeless. One example that I was actually thinking about in depth today is the whole of the universe. If you can imagine that it is truly infinite in its three-dimensional sense. So if you were to travel outside of Earth, outside of the solar system, outside of the galaxy, and just continue and continue, your journey would never end. That's what physics tells us, is that there really is no limit to the universe, or if there is, it's constantly expanding. And so if that logic were true, then you would basically be led to believe that in an infinitely expanding universe, every single possibility exists. It has to. It cannot not exist, because the universe is infinite. And so when you think of these amazing concepts of a parallel life or a multiverse, you can almost envision that somewhere in an unquantifiable distance away from planet Earth, you're tapping into the energetic frequency of something that is happening, or something that I guess has happened, and maybe in a different version of Earth and a different arrangement of particles. And then the process that leads you to, if we were to give it a label, the process that leads you to Earth serial number A015325 is not through your own choice, but instead through the choice of your highest self, the choice of the universe. Is that kind of an accurate description of what you're telling me?
Yeah, what comes up for me is that these emotions, they are linked to certain time-space realities. But we also know that they are projections, right? So when you have, for example, a conflict with someone, you have like negative emotions towards someone, you know that it's not the person right? That this has nothing to do with the person. So it's something in your energy body, and then you just see someone and you connect that with that frequency. And so that's when you get used to this idea. So you know it's not outside of yourself, it's always inside of yourself. Then if you start playing with that, if you come to another body, and then it will be the same sort of process, but with the people there. So when you know very deeply that it's not the people outside of you, it's just sort of frequency twists or distortions inside your own bubble. It's just you and your bubble that are traveling in different dimensions. So if you come to another place and you start projecting there, you can sort of, you have this like double awareness that yes, you're projecting, but also yes, it's just a distortion inside your own energy body.
So what is it about clearing our own patterns through meditation, through sessions, through various healing tools that allow us to access these parallel lives in flow?
What I've found is that it's like different frequencies, and these different parallel lives are in different frequencies, like different addresses. And so it's not possible to connect to a very high frequency parallel existence if you in 2024 have a lower frequency.
Yeah.
And this brings me into my experience with Atlantis, because the first times I had visions from Atlantis was maybe 10-15 years ago, and that was very different from what I experience now. So what I connect with this is that when I in 2024 or these other years that we have here, like 2015, or then the frequency level we have here sort of gives us the access to similar frequencies in other places. So for example, Atlantis. So in 2014, for example, I was able to access Atlantis according to the frequency I had then. So at that time, it was mostly really, really bad stuff, like drowning, panic, running, traumas, right? And then as we continue to clear and heal and heal and heal, then we start having a different frequency in this earth reality. And then we start accessing the frequency reality that was higher there. Does that make sense?
Makes a ton of sense. It's almost like the Earth, if we look at the Earth as its own matrix, it's like we must be, as a collective, as a oneness, realigning with the Earth that once was. Or, yeah, because I mean, I'm looking at it linearly, assuming that this Atlantis that's being connected to was once standing on the same planet that we're standing on.
Yes. And so with parallel lives, we share the burdens. It's like a meta node, you could say. So it's like, yes, we think we have one body and we have these problems here, But actually, the problems we have here is sort of just mirrored from these other parallel realities in that similar frequency bracket. So when we go to, or if we don't go there, but when we access another reality, it's sort of similar problems there. And what came first, the chicken or the egg? So it's these Atlantis problems that you have now playing out here that you're trying to solve, or is it your problems that this Atlantis version of you is trying to solve there? And then we all together go up in frequency, but the point is that Atlantis went down in frequency. So it's like they went from very, very high frequency, and then they started declining. And in linear time, it's been 13,000 years or so that it's been low frequency, like the dark ages. And now we're coming into the next age, and so the frequency is going up. So we here talking here, we are living in a time when the frequency is just going up and up and up. And my experience in Atlantis is that they are living in a time where they go down and down and down and down. And sort of we meet on the way up and up on the way down. And that's when we collaborate and heal each other's distortions.
Yeah, that is quite mind-blowing to think about these two intersecting timelines. So I'm just gonna rehash what you had said, which is Atlantis was going through a process of lowering their frequency, going further and further into separation. And now the 2024 Earth is going from a time of very deep separation, very like low density, and now it's moving up. So why do you think that flow is bringing you to experience all of this?
Well, yeah, I could have mental models around this. I do find it interesting. I do find it helpful because when I see and experience the things in Atlantis, I experience that what we came from, and then we are going down into darkness. And here in 2024, that sort of gives me, because I feel I know where we are going. And so I know where we're coming from. We're coming from this darkness. And then seeing these timelines in Atlantis gives me models for where we're going, basically, because yes, we are going into the unknown and we have no clue what's going to happen next minute, next hour, next week, because we have surrendered. But these visions from Atlantis gives me sort of a direction, which I feel that it's not specific. Like I don't know the details, but I just see general outlines, like how society will look like and how we will behave with each other, and how it is to live in unconditional love, and that everyone knows deeply that we are one, and all these things. So it gives me like a roadmap, I would say.
Amazing. So what can you tell us about what we should be expecting in this societal evolution that is to play out?
Yes, so as I was saying, that it's like different chapters have been opening up for me in Atlantis, and with time that body has become quite similar to my physical body in a way, because I've become so used to spending hours of my awareness there, and every parallel reality has like a signature. And then the first time we go somewhere, everything is unknown, and we need to sort of ping, and we need to figure things out and talk to people. But then when we have been guided to the similar place many times, it becomes like a parallel body. Like, okay, now I'm here again. And then what has expired there is that different chapters have opened up. So it started then with the darker, with a lot of separation and lack and conflict. But as my frequency has risen here, chapters have been opening up in that Atlantis world where I can see, that's how it was before what I have now experienced. And then again, that. So it's like the really golden age of Atlantis I have not access to yet, because we are not in that frequency range. But what I've seen is that in the beginning of the fall, we enjoyed it. We talk about upgrades here now, like upgrade to a higher frequency. And I guess you would call their Atlantean version downgrades, because they went down in density. But they thought it was really interesting experiment. So they thought like, okay, we have been doing this golden age for quite some time, and now we will try something new. And then they will get like density, and they will get more separated, and they would start a little bit to forget who they were. But in the beginning, they didn't forget. So in the golden age, they completely remember everything. So they're like, you go into a body and you're like a soul. There's no difference between outside and inside, sort of. But when we started going down, we were playing with this separation. We were playing with scarcity and lack. And in the beginning, it was quite innocent. And also with like intimacy and friendships and everything, it was fun to experience ourselves as the others. So that was a very interesting era. And this is reminding me of what we are now stepping into. So this is where we are coming now in the coming years. This feeling of quite deep knowing that we are one and that the universe has our back, but we are also separate. So this is what we are stepping into, and that is what we enjoyed also there. But then it went further and further down, and we all, because the people listening to this, you are also there. And we all started to forgetting who we were, and we started fighting in various ways. And we started to believe that lack and scarcity were real concepts. So we became greedy. And the society you can see now basically started there. And I get emotional actually talking about this, because this has been very hard for me to process. To be able to feel and experience us all living in harmony, and then experiencing how we week by week just got into more and more separation, more and more conflict, and then centralization happened. So So people lost their sovereignty because they became afraid, and then they started gathering together around strong leaders, and then the leaders didn't care about decentralization. So because they also felt lack, and then they could fill that gap with people doing as they say, or people paying them, and then this just grew more and more. They got armies, they started wars, and it got really nasty. Yeah.
So was Atlantis like a worldwide empire kind of, or was it one specific place? Because a lot of times we hear about the ancient ruins of Atlantis, but I think from what it sounds like, you're describing Atlantis more being the state of the planet as a whole. It's not necessarily one nation or one city.
Yeah, my feeling is that it's quite similar to what we have now. Like, maybe you could say that the Western world is like Atlantis, and then the Eastern world would be Lemuria, because they were very technologically advanced. They could travel, and it was these different sections of these different kingdoms of Atlantis that were acting independently. And in the beginning, it was perfectly fine, but then in the fall, they started conflicts with each other. And they got confused about how to lead these kingdoms.
So it's almost like the game got so easy for them that they wanted to challenge themselves more. I've heard in other places that the Atlanteans were of such high frequency that they knew all of this was going to happen, and that some of them were afraid of it happening, and so they tried to latch on to their higher density, their higher version of themselves. And I think, I mean, it was really to no avail. Obviously, it all just kind of crumbled down. Do you think that, well, I guess it's not even really a question. It seems like what they did is they said it's time for us to experience separation on an even deeper level. And as much as we might not enjoy its discomfort in the moment, from a higher perspective, these sort of bad feelings, the pain, the suffering, all of these things that when we experience them, we wish we weren't experiencing them. It's all something that we want to experience. It's all to them. It's an upgrade. We're going to upgrade our reality to feel even more.
Yes, and this experiment, if you could call it that, is still ongoing. And so the idea here is that when we come out of these dark ages, we will be able to go even higher than the previous time. So that golden age of Atlantis was one cycle, or one turn in the spiral. And then to keep that golden age would be to use force in a way. And then they allowed separation to come in. And every time we separate, we sort of gather strength or experiences. And when we come back together again, we have a different frequency, like a stronger frequency.
So do you think it will be easier for us to shift back? I mean, I'm thinking very linearly, but do you think it'll be easier for us to shift back into a higher consciousness because of these energetic memories that are embedded? Is that kind of the idea? Is we experience it, we experience the dropping of frequency, and meanwhile we still have the energetic signature of experiencing this golden age and oneness. It reminds me a lot of the theory of evolution. Evolution says that the more that an animal, human experiences and learns from, the more adapt to life it becomes.
Yeah, the analogy that comes up for me is the Bitcoin price and these cycles of 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's quite easy to come back up to the all-time high from the previous cycle. And then we go into what we call price discovery, right? Then it's uncharted territory, and no models will help us to understand what's going to happen. And this is how I see the bigger cycles of the ages also, that we can have an easier time to sort of slide up to the level of Atlantis golden age. And that will be like the all-time high from the previous cycle. But because we are in a higher level of the spiral, it will continue up. And then nobody has been there. And nobody knows at all like what kind of abilities or what we are able to achieve. And last time in the golden age of Atlantis, it was, from my understanding, it was intergalactic society. So it came from different star systems in the physical reality, or that higher density then, where the density of our bodies were much higher. So the density of the other star beings were perhaps similar. So it was different species that came and lived on Earth at that time.
Yeah, that's really amazing to consider. I know that there are still a lot of people, even in spiritual circles, who are still kind of exploring this rabbit hole of possibilities when it comes to the concept of not being alone in the universe, and the knowledge that these beings could bring. It's also sad to think that we were at one time a thriving civilization with so many different extraterrestrial cultures, and now we separated so far, so deep, to the point that all of those cultures just left. Or maybe they didn't. I mean, it's also said that they exist on a different plane altogether. We just don't see them.
Yeah, I would say that they are still here, but they are in a different density. Or so our eyes are not seeing that density, our physical eyes, but we see them with our internal eyes. So they are here very much. But what's interesting here, maybe in this context of this podcast, is that some of these groups, spirit groups, are interested in Bitcoin, and that they are promoting Bitcoin as a path for humanity out of slavery. I mean, I'm a good example of this myself because I surrendered completely, and I've been guided to start these podcasts and all these things. It's obvious that I'm being guided by beings that want to spread this kind of materials. And then the question have only been, who are they? How many are they? And what about the others? All the other star beings and galaxies that come to us. What are their perspective on Bitcoin? Are they against it? Or are they unaware? So you could say that it's quite some spiritual politics going on behind the scenes of all these spirit guides and how they should guide us, how they should guide humanity. And if you look at all these channelings, so it's millions of channelings every day done through different people. So if we look at what are the messages that they are sending through, so it's always an agenda behind those messages. So they're always trying to help, but the question is, in which direction are they helping? So if we look at the whole range from centralized beings, centralized humans. So it's like you can assume that centralized humans also have centralized spirit guides. I mean, spirit guides, they're basically just giving people visions and giving them directions. And then you have the whole specter to the other side of decentralization. And the spirit guides then working with people who support decentralization. And funnily enough, this is also what I saw in Atlantis. It's like these different kingdoms. You can say that they are different colors of the rainbow. So if you go from one side of the rainbow, you have like centralization, and then you have on the other side, you have decentralization. Then these kings were ruling their kingdoms according to these qualities, if you can say. And similar thing is going on in the world today. So we have a lot of talk in Bitcoin and Nostr about decentralization, and then we have the centralization. So if we look at this in a bigger perspective, and we see that that everyone is guided by spirit beings, then we have these different forces. And this is what happens when we go down into separation. It's like these qualities that in oneness, it's just beautiful and everyone is just living in harmony. But as we go in separation, these qualities of centralizations versus decentralization, they're taken to extremes. And for a long time, I thought decentralization was the best. And it's also the name of this podcast. But what I've come to realize is that as long as I hold on to the spectrum of the decentralization and think that I'm better than the centralized part of the rainbow, then I'm maintaining the conflict. So it seems to me that when we go up in frequency, we just realize that we're all one, and that there is centralization. They're just like doing their thing, and the decentralized people are doing their thing. And as long as we think that we are separate, we think that we are better than the others, and we do things to sort of fix things. But the other side is also doing things to fix things. So that's when the non-doing, the passive focus, and the Tao will lead us all together back together again.
So there are these decentralizing forces and there are centralizing forces. The centralizing forces, from your perspective, the centralizing forces, when separation occurred, began to kind of live for themselves. So it's like they began to build their own ego. They began to forget that all of the power was inside of them and not outside of them. So leaders began almost leeching power from the people that were following them. And in this co-constructed reality, the followers then gave their power to the leaders. Is this model accurate in your perspective?
Yes. As long as we have leaders, we have followers. They are two sides of the same duality. But I would say my experience with being a decentralized promoter, it's almost as if I was holding on to mental models around this without really feeling into it. Because when we do feel into it, the centralized forces become our brothers. But when we just hold on to a mental model about decentralization, the centralized forces are our enemies. And that's the big difference. So when we go down into separation, we all go down. And then we just have different versions of being in separation. And you can say that the decentralized people are nicer, but it's sort of just a different type of coping mechanism. Or maybe because what I see in the centralized camp is that they sort of have a vision for a better world. Like it's just very different vision of a better world, where they just think that control and these things will be better somehow. And then in the decentralized, we think the opposite.
Yeah. We've been exploring that a lot, it seems like, on this season, embracing darkness, embracing the universe's propensity to want to serve itself sometimes. And I was just having a conversation about this with a local Bitcoiner, not on the spiritual front, but one of my favorite stories or analogies to Bitcoin is the mycelium of money. And I think it's a really, really good example because it represents the logical nature of Bitcoin basically acting as this rule set, this protocol amongst a bunch of different nodes, which you can equate maybe to the protocol or the biological protocol of mycelium. There are certain aspects, however, of mycelium in nature that are slightly different, being as there are hubs of mycelium that grow like on the surface and collect sunlight. And maybe I'm wrong about the species of mushroom, but if you can, I believe that's correct because I've seen pictures of it. So yeah, there are hubs of it that collect sunlight and nutrients, and you can almost see them as centralizing forces in the mycelium organism. And so long as that mycelium, that central aspect, that biological aspect of mycelium is following the biological protocol of the rest of the network will get along fine with it. What happens, though, when this hub of mycelium becomes centralized selfishly, the rest of the network of mycelium, still playing by the same biological rule set, can say, no, we're going to cut you off. We don't want you to be a part of our network anymore. And so you can see, like, if nature is representing a higher consciousness version of centralization, we would see that, hey, this aspect of ourselves, this greater aspect of humanity whom we've been relying on their light to guide us, to give us leadership, to provide us tools for learning about ourselves, it's becoming centralized. It's not acting in our best interest anymore. Instead of forgetting that and going along with it and serving that leader, we just let that leader go. Maybe it's not a great analogy because, well, I guess if you let that leader go, then it can dissolve. It can go back to the dirt and it will reform, right? So so it works. It kind of works well. So you release that, and then maybe a new hub of centralization will form from there.
Yeah, I get the sense of that you're asking, did we have to go this dark that we did? So we talked about these different cycles and that we went into the dark ages to expand as a creation. And then, so in this darkness, we have people playing the role of centralized. And I feel that what you're fishing for is that that it's somehow up to them. So the people that are centralized and they keep on pushing, like we all have them in our lives probably, and we feel that they are stubborn or why they can't just let go. So it's like, is it their fault? Did they make the fall longer than needed, longer than necessary? Or is it okay? Is it part of the plan? Is it just natural that they hold on to their fears and things like this? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And what I was getting at too is if we continue with the example of the mycelium, the Atlantis that we're talking about here today, the one that went through the fall, the mycelium began to centralize, and the followers shifted the protocol to experience what it was like to be a part of centralization. So I get the sense that the Atlanteans, as much as separation is confusing and painful, they wanted to truly experience it. And maybe it wasn't their choice entirely. Maybe the flow would have led them to that point. But they still had some level of sovereignty that they retained in going through this separation, didn't they?
So the timeline that I have experienced is that the beginning of lower density was quite interesting, and we didn't worry much. And then it started getting out of hand, and that's when my parallel self started suffering, and he was telling people about what's going to happen, but he was definitely not happy about it. He was more warning people that you will experience more and more conflict, and it's more and more important that you are centering in yourself and all these things. So, and as we went lower, he suffered a lot. So if you're saying that Atlanteans wanted to do this, yes, maybe as an initial intention, but this was probably because they could see the future. Like I can experience this time through my Atlantean self. So because they could see the cycles in advance. So like as my Atlantean self, I knew that this me would happen because our abilities were very much stronger, very much more developed. So we were able to know and understand so much more than we do now. But the pain of loved ones, again, I can feel the pain. The pain of the loved ones turning against you, and the pain of your colleagues, and it, with all these abilities, it was even worse because you could feel all the suffering of all the people everywhere. So that's what comes up for me. It was like really not so fun in the end. It was fun just in the beginning, and then it was suffering, and then then people invented pleasure as an escape from this, right? And then others went into more like monasteries and so on. But the people who was more part of society, they invented pleasure, which then became popular, and still it is popular today.
Right, because pleasure is like an escape from pain.
Yeah, but it produces even more pain. But
Right.
people forgot all these things.
So does that mean then that separation is inherently painful?
It's painful as long as we attach to it. And this is so when we were going down, we didn't know, we didn't have like these healing tools that we have now, right? It was this is sort of what we had developed during the Dark Ages, because when this separation and when this conflict and greed and all this came, it's just seeped in like a gas, like slowly into every man on earth. And then we started changing our behaviors and so on. So like here now, it's like you get born into a body and you have full of shit, and then you find a way to clear that shit. And so it's quite straightforward. But going down, it was not like this because people didn't know how to deal with it. So attachments, for example. So for example, if your loved ones turned against you, you could experience the suffering, but you didn't know how to counteract it. It was like, or even if you had tools, they sort of didn't work because you just every week you just went deeper and deeper into density, and in density you need to have the attachments. And so it was really hard to stay centered. Many of us tried. We created like monasteries and these kind of Shambhala villages, and and so on. But I guess some attempts were quite successful, but it feels like this huge force of the universe just went down. And since we're all connected, even if you're in Shambhala, you're connected with the rest of humanity. So wherever you go on the planet, you will have conflicts with the people and judgment. I mean, it starts with just judgment. The pain of experiencing judgment in your own being and not being able to stop it.
I was thinking about judgment in depth today and developed an interesting model that judgment isn't necessarily determining whether or not something is good or bad. I think that the word judgment is somewhat loaded in that way. However, really what we're talking about is classification. So looking at something and seeing it for something that is separate, seeing it, classifying it as a tree, classifying it as a rock, classifying it as another person, and forgetting altogether that those things are an inner reflection. And I can feel this confusion because I want to feel and believe this concept with all of my being, but the rationality that comes with the age of separation is very, very powerful, at least it is in my being. And so I have my rational mind coming in and saying, it's like this objectivist mindset that is very common among our Bitcoiner circles, saying, well, that is a rock. Objectively, that is a rock. We can all agree that that is a rock. It's not a part of you. What path do we as Bitcoiners have in parallel with this Atlantean society? Are you familiar with that path? And if so, what is next for us?
Just a quick comment on the judgment there. The categorization is depending on the density. So if you're a low density, then you have like a strong judgment. And if you're a higher, then you have like a soft judgment. So then it's more like a categorization without a charge behind it, without force. So for Bitcoiners, I strongly feel that they are in the decentralized spectrum of the rainbow, so to speak, to use that analogy. And that's what we are representing here on Earth at this time. And it's interesting that this time we have a piece of technology that it's almost like a weapon. And technology. So you can see it's like our army, like the decentralized army against the centralized army. And then they have their weapons and we are our weapons. And the battle of the future of humanity. And like I said, we have different spirit teams helping us. And we have our own hearts and minds. And connecting the dots and understanding how we can get out of this mess. And I think Bitcoiners are playing an important role. But now again, I'm talking like it's like a war and it's like urgent and we have to fix things. but it's not really like that. It's more like pick your player kind of game. So you're playing in the decentralized team, and you're playing in the centralized team, since we're all one. But me, for one, I like my position here in the decentralized team, and I think we are able to awaken and begin to come into this next level where we feel and we know that we are one, and we know that we have nothing to fear because we created all of this, and that we are able to let go of the fears and in bigger numbers become the co-creators of this reality, and have fun, play, and just do things we love, and that will then rub off on those who are ready. Oh, something like this, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, very, very beautifully said. Are there any projects, or is there any bit of information you want to give about some of the stuff that you're working on to the audience?
Well, I'm very much in a transitional period at this moment where I don't know what will happen. It's very much my external reality is shifting so fast as a reflection of my inner reality. So this year, 2024, everything is much faster. So I have a few projects, but nothing is concrete yet. So I think nothing for now.
Well, if there's nothing else to share with the audience today, I just want to thank you for coming on. This has been such an intriguing conversation. I always love speaking with you about your experiences because I have so much genuine curiosity that flows through me, and I do my best to try to make it as concise as I can, but I know it can be confusing at times. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing everything you did today.
Thank you, Caleb. You're a very big support in my life, where I can always connect with you if I feel that I'm expanding too fast. So thank you for your presence on the planet at this time, and thank you for doing this interview.
Mm-hmm.